Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton and indeed all over the Shire for a year and a day, and was remembered much longer than that. It became a fireside story for young hobbits, and eventually Mad Baggins, who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favorite character of legend and lived on long after all the true events were forgotten. Frodo gasped. "It is quite cool," said Gandalf. "Take it." Frodo received it on his shrinking palm. It seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever. "Hold it up," said Gandalf, "and look closely." As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside, lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright, and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. "I cannot read the fiery letters," said Frodo in a quavering voice. "No," said Gandalf, "but I can. The letters are of Elvish of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this in the common tongue is what's said close enough. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." "I shall have to go, but—" and here he looked hard at Sam. "If you really care about me, we'll keep the dead secret. See? If you don't, if you even breathe a word of what you've heard here, then I hope Gandalf will turn you into a spotted toad and fill the garden full of grass snakes." Sam fell to his knees, trembling. "Get up, Sam," said Gandalf. "I have thought of something better than that. Something to shut your mouth and punish you properly for listening. You shall go away with Mr. Frodo." "Me, sir!" cried Sam, springing up like a dog invited for a walk. "Me go and see elves and all! Hooray!" he shouted, and then burst into tears. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought, as his hand touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled to the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it had passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right. "Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then world behind and home ahead, we'll wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed." The song ended. "And now to bed, and now to bed," sang Pippin in a high voice. Was silent for a moment. "I do not like this news," he said at last. "That Gandalf should be late does not bode well. But it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait." "And it is also said," answered Frodo, "go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes." "Is it indeed?" laughed Gildor. "Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. But what would you? You have not told me all concerning yourself, and how then should I choose better than you? But if you demand advice, I will for friendship's sake give it." In the morning, Frodo woke refreshed. He was lying on a bower made of a living tree, with branches laced and drooping to the ground. His bed was of fern and grass, deep and soft and strangely fragrant. The sun was shining through the fluttering leaves, which were still green upon the tree. He jumped up and went out. Sam was sitting on the grass near the edge of the wood. Pippin was standing, studying the sky and weather. There was no sign of the elves. He produced a large basket from under the seat. "I was nearly forgetting," he said. "Mrs. Maggott put this up for Mr. Baggins, with her compliments." He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. "A water is fair that leaps on high, and a fountain white beneath the sky, but never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet." There was a terrific splash and a shout of "Whoa!" from Frodo. It appeared that a lot of Pippin's bath had imitated a fountain and leaped on high. In the kitchen on a table near the fire. "I suppose you three won't want mushrooms again," said Fredegar without much hope. "Yes, we shall," cried Pippin. "They're mine," said Frodo, "given to me by Mrs. Maggot, a queen among farmers' wives. Take your greedy hands away and I'll serve them." Hobbits have a passion for mushrooms, surpassing even the greediest likings of big people, a fact which partly explains young Frodo's long expeditions to the renowned fields of the Marish and the wrath of the injured Maggot. As he lay there, thinking and getting a hold of himself, he noticed all at once that the darkness was slowly giving way. A pale, greenish light was growing round him. It did not at first show him what kind of a place he was in, for the light seemed to be coming out of himself and from the floor beside him, and had not yet reached the roof or wall. He turned, and there in the cold glow he saw lying beside him Sam, Pippin, and Merry. They were on their backs, and their faces looked deathly pale, and they were clad in white. About them lay many treasures, of gold maybe, though in that light they looked cold and unlovely. On their heads were circlets, gold chains were about their waists, and on their fingers were many rings. Swords lay by their sides, and shields were at their feet. But across their three necks lay one long naked sword. Cold be hand and heart and bone, and cold be sleep under stone. Never more to wake on stony bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. In the black wind the stars shall die, and still on gold here let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land. He heard behind his head a creaking and scraping sound. Raising himself on one arm, he looked, and saw now in the pale light that they were in a kind of passage, which behind them turned a corner. Round the corner a long arm was groping, walking on its fingers towards Sam, who was lying nearest, and towards the hilt of the sword that lay upon him. "Don't make yourselves too much at home. Please remember, all of you, that the name of Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given." They now mounted their ponies and rode off silently into the evening. Darkness came down quickly as they plodded slowly uphill and up again, until at last they saw lights twinkling some distance ahead. Before them rose Bree Hill, barring the way, a dark mass against misty stars, and under its western flank nestled a large village. Towards it they now hurried, desiring only to find a fire and a door between them and the night. "Good evening, little master," he said, bending down. "What may you be wanting?" "Beds for 4 and stabling for 5 ponies, if that can be managed. Are you Mr. Butterbur?" "That's right. Barlaman is my name. Barlaman Butterbur at your service. You're from the Shire, eh?" he said, and then suddenly he clapped his hand to his forehead as if trying to remember something. "Hobbits!" he cried. "Now what does that remind me of? Might I ask your name, sir?" "Mr. Took and Mr. Brandybuck," said Frodo. "And this is Sam Gamgee. My name is Underhill." "There now," said Mr. Butterbur, snapping his fingers. "It's gone again. But it'll come back when I have time to think. I'm run off my feet, but I'll see what I can do for you. We don't often get a party out of the Shire nowadays, and I should be sorry not to make you welcome. But there is such a crowd already in the house tonight as there hasn't been for long enough. It never rains but it pours, as they say in Bree." He had a tall tankard in front of him and was smoking a long-stemmed pipe curiously carved. His legs were stretched out before him, showing high boots of supple leather that fitted him well, but had seen much wear and were now caked with mud. A travel-stained cloak of heavy dark green cloth was drawn close about him, and in spite of the heat of the room, he wore a hood that overshadowed his face, but the gleam of his eyes could be seen as he watched the hobbits. "Who is that?" Frodo asked when he got a chance to whisper to Mr. Butterbur. "I don't think you introduced him." "Him," said the landlord in an answering whisper, cocking an eye without turning his head. "I don't rightly know. He's one of the wandering folk, rangers we call them. He seldom talks, but not when you can tell a rare tale when he has the mind. He disappears for a month or a year, and then he pops up again. He was in and out pretty often last spring, but I haven't seen him about lately. What his right name is I've never heard, but he's known around here as When the ping and a pong the fiddle strings broke, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such fun, and the Saturday dish went off at a run with the silver Sunday spoon. The round moon rolled behind the hill as the sun raised up her head. She hardly believed her fiery eyes, for though it was day, to her surprise, they all went back to bed. There was loud and long applause. Frodo had a good voice, and the song tickled their fancy. "Where's old Barley?" they cried. "He ought to hear this. Bob ought to learn his cat the fiddle, and then we'd have a dance." They called for more ale and began to shout, "Let's have it again, master. Come on now, once more." They made Frodo have another drink and then began his song again, while many of them joined in, for the tune was well known and they were quick at picking up words. It was now Frodo's turn to feel pleased with himself. He capered about on the table, and when he came the second time to "The Cow Jumped Over the Moon," he leaped in the air. Much too vigorously, for he came down, bang, into a tray full of mugs and slipped and rolled off the table with a crash, clatter, and bump. The audience all opened their mouths wide for laughter and stopped short in gaping silence, for the singer disappeared. He simply vanished as if he had gone slap through the floor without leaving a hole. A friend of mine on the road. A man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again, not for any reason whatever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Things wanted always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell. He had heavy black brows and dark scornful eyes. His large mouth curled in a sneer. He was smoking a short black pipe. As they approached, he took it out of his mouth and spat. "Morning, Longshanks," he said. "Off early. Found some friends at last." Strider nodded but did not answer. "Morning, my little friends," he said to the others. "I suppose you know who you've taken up with. That stick-at-not Strider, that is. Though I've heard other names not so pretty. Watch out tonight. And you, Sammy, don't go ill-treating my poor old pony. Pah!" And he spat again. Sam turned quickly. "And you, Fernie," he said, "put your ugly face out of sight or we'll get hurt." With a sudden flick, quick as lightning, an apple left his hand and hit Bill square on the nose. He ducked too late, and curses came from behind the hedge. "Waste of a good apple," said Sam regretfully, and strode on. Both the knife and the hand that held it glowed with a pale light. He sprang forward and bore down on Frodo. At that moment, Frodo threw himself forward on the ground, and he heard himself crying aloud, "O Elbereth, Githoniel!" At the same time, he struck at the feet of his enemy. A shrill cry rang out in the night, and he felt a pain like a dart of poisoned ice pierce his left shoulder. Even as he swooned, he caught, as through a swirling mist, a glimpse of Strider leaping out of the darkness with a flaming brand of wood in either hand. With a last effort, Frodo, dropping his sword, slipped the rings from his finger and closed his right hand tight upon it. "I don't know about that," said Sam, "but out with this suit. It ain't what I'd call proper poetry, if you understand me, just a bit of nonsense. But these old images here brought it to my mind." Standing up with his hands behind his back, as if he was at school, he began to sing an old tune. Troll sat alone on his seat of stone, and munched and mumbled a bare old bone. For many a year he had gnawed it near, for meat was hard to come by. Done by, gum by. In a cave in the hills he dwelt alone, and his meat was hard to come by. But harder than stone is the flesh and bone of a troll that sits in the hills alone. As well set your boot to the mountain's root, for the seat of a troll don't feel it. Peel it, heel it. Old Troll laughed when he heard Tom groan, and he knew his toes could feel it. Tom's leg is game since home he's came, and his bootless foot is lasting lame. But Troll don't care, and he is still there with the bone he boned from its owner. Donor, boner, Troll's old seat is still the same, and the bone he boned from his owner. "Well, that's some learning to us all," laughed Merry. "As well you used a stick and not your hand, Strider." "What did you come by that, Sam?" asked Pippin. "I've never heard those words before." Sam muttered something inaudible. "It's out of his own head, of course," said Frodo. "I am learning a lot about Sam Gamgee on this journey. First he was a conspirator, now he's a jester. He'll end up becoming a wizard. Or a warrior." "I hope not," said Sam. "I don't want to be neither." Soon Strider beckoned to them, and the hobbits left the bushes and hurried down the road. "This is Glorfindel, who dwells in the house of Elrond," said Strider. "Hail and well met at last," said the elf lord to Frodo. "I was sent from Rivendell to look for you. We feared that you were in danger upon the road." "Then Gandalf has reached Rivendell?" cried Frodo joyfully. No, he had not when I departed, but that was 9 days ago, answered Glorfindel. Elrond received news that troubled him. Some of my kindred, journeying in your land beyond the Baranduin, learned that things were amiss and sent messages as swiftly as they could. Come back, they called. To Mordor we will take you. Go back, he whispered. The ring, they cried with deadly voices, and immediately their leaders urged his horse forward into the water, followed closely by 2 others. By Elbereth and Luthien the Fair, said Frodo with a last effort, lifting up his sword, you shall have neither the ring nor me. Then the leader, who was now half across the ford, stood up menacing in his stirrups and raised up his hand. Frodo was stricken dumb. He felt his tongue cleave to his mouth and his heart laboring. His sword broke and fell out of his shaking hand. The elf horse reared and snorted. The foremost of the black riders had almost set foot upon the shore. At that moment there came a roaring and a rushing, a noise of loud waters rolling many stones. Dimly Frodo saw the river below him rise, and down along its course there came a plumed cavalry of waves. White flames seemed to Frodo to flicker on their crests, and he half fancied that he saw amid the water white riders upon white horses with frothing manes. The 3 riders that were still in the midst of the ford were overwhelmed. They disappeared, buried suddenly under angry foam. Those that were behind drew back in dismay. With his last failing senses, Frodo heard cries, and it seemed to him that he saw, beyond the riders that hesitated on the shore, a shiny figure as white light, and behind it ran small shadowy forms, waving flames that flared red in the gray mist that was falling over the world. The black horses were filled with madness, and leaping forward in terror, they bore their riders into the rushing flood. Their piercing cries were drowned in the roaring of the river as it carried them away. Then Frodo felt himself falling, and the roaring and confusion seemed to rise and engulf him together with his enemies. He heard and saw no more. End of Book 1.